So I'm originally from Boonton Township, New Jersey. I lived there until I was 14 years old because my dad got remarried. So we moved to Pennsylvania. We moved to Collegeville, Pennsylvania. And then I didn't really get involved with journalism or anything until I went to high school. I got started on the school paper. I was just like a basic news writer, and what we did for that was we took like international headlines or national headlines and we basically just kind of like copied and like pasted from CNN and like all those other websites. So it wasn't like anything real journalistically, but it was fun to do and it was fun to like kind of be a part of that in high school. Because I think that's what really set me up for like college and taking on the Eagle and all that stuff. Yeah, there wasn't a particular news story that I can think of, but I knew that I wanted to do, or at least write about news that was more like on a bigger scale, either nationally or internationally. And so that's why in the high school paper, the section that I chose to write for was like the news section. Because even though like it was difficult for us to like, as high school students to go out and like find experts on these things and like interview people that were like involved with these like big national news stories. Even still, like writing blurbs about them, like just like short little blurbs or summaries on them for the school paper was like my introduction to kind of keeping up with the news and just kind of like learning about the world outside of my like small town bubble. So yeah, that's it was really fun. I liked it a lot. Um, in terms of like my upbringing and how it kind of like influenced me into journalism, I always loved to write. I knew that writing was something that I wanted to do from a very young age, but I didn't know how I would make a career out of it. I always thought that I would be like a author or something like that, but when I finally got to high school and I was like trying to figure out what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, as high school kids do, I guess. Um, I was like talking with people and they were like, "What if you were like a journalist and just like," because I knew what I wanted to do was write and travel, and they were like, "What's something that combines those things?" Oh, journalism, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds interesting." And my junior year of high school, I ended up taking a journalism class and I loved it. It was, this was still when I was doing the school paper, but the class was nothing like what the school paper was. They actually taught us how to interview people. We watched a lot of like documentaries about like big journalism moments and like how to write basic news stories and like the inverted pyramid and like just basically everything you kind of need to know before stepping into like the college scene of journalism. So just covering the basics. In terms of like people that really influenced me, I can't really think of a teacher or anything like that that really like pushed me forward with it. It was just mostly me kind of pushing myself and being like, because the whole time I was into, or I was figuring out what I wanted to do. I was like, oh, like maybe I'll do this. Like so far, this hasn't disappointed me. So let me just kind of keep going with it and see how far I can take it before something changes my mind. And it just never did. I applied to AU because I knew they had one of the best journalism programs in the country. DC was like where I wanted to be because it was a city that wasn't too far from home. There is a lot going on here, like in terms of like news, in terms of like politics, like international, like politics and business, and lots of those things that I wanted to cover. And I knew that I wanted to be in a city from the get go. Like I wanted to be in a city because there's always like something to do, there's always people to talk to, there's always like events happening. So AU just kind of seemed like the perfect fit for me at the time. So I applied. Um, to AU, and I got in early decision. So once I applied, I was like locked in. I was like, yes, all for it. Um, yeah, and then I got here. I started in August of 2016. Um, and coming here was definitely kind of a culture shock because it's very much like it's not like any other college that I've ever like stepped on before, in that it's very much like, ooh, like we love politics, we love like every like we're nerdy, like we don't do like the typical like go out to football games every night, and like it just it was refreshing, but at the same time it was like a huge culture shock in that way. So my first semester, I wasn't a part of student media. I think I wrote a few like pieces for other organizations, but they had nothing to do with news at all. They were like concert reviews and like play reviews and things like that. Um, but when I heard about like the first couple of banana incidents, I was very shocked that at a school that claimed to be so like politically active and liberal and like progressive, that this kind of thing was happening. It I was shocked. I was very shocked and kind of appalled. The incident involved um there was the two black women or black students in the dorms had bananas thrown into their dorm rooms. And then I think there was one incident also where somebody wrote racial slurs on somebody's whiteboard. It was the whiteboard of another like black female student. And like when I heard about that, I was definitely disgusted, and a lot of other people were also disgusted, and I ended up having a lot of conversations in some of my classes about it, um, which I thought was like we needed to do that. Yeah. So the incident was brought up in quite a few of my classes, and my professors opened up discussion about like the university's response to this, as well as like how students felt, and students were allowed to express how they felt, especially students who also felt targeted, particularly black students on campus. Um, I can't remember if there were protests about it. There probably was, but like I completely stayed out of those. I just felt like it was not my place to be there. Um, and it just felt awful because I felt like there was nothing that I could do to make these students feel better, um, because they felt like they had targets on their backs. And yeah, it just, it felt awful being like comfortable on campus when they were not, and that there was nothing I could do about it. Okay, so it's 2016. I kind of came into college knowing I wanted to do journalism, but I really had no idea what I was getting into. Like, I knew that I would go out and interview people, I knew I would be writing stories on a regular basis, but I just didn't know, like, and I knew I wanted to write for the Eagle. Like, I knew coming into college, like, I want to keep doing the school paper. I loved it in high school. I want to keep doing it. I actually uh, didn't get involved with it right away just because, like, I had no idea, like, I wasn't really sure how to get involved, and I also wasn't sure, like, if I got involved, what I would do. But and found out that campus is very like politically active, always up to date on news, and that was something that like I had to like quickly pick up. And I found that all these kids were like very driven with everything that they did, and they were out to like, I don't know, they were very anxious to get their hands on stories. And I was like, oh, maybe like, should I be keeping up with them? Like, I don't know if this is like normal. Like, but it's 2016. The election is imminent. So everybody's got their eyes glued to all the debates and on everybody's, like go out and vote, make sure you're voting, whatever. And I sent in my absentee ballots, as many AU students did. Um, and then I remember like the morning of the election of when Donald Trump won, and campus erupted into complete chaos. I remember there were protests out by MGC. There were flag burnings happening. There were just students that were very, very angry, and they just didn't know what to do with all of that anger. And so they just kind of like went out to the quad and just like yelled about it for hours. So I kind of like got myself out of that situation because, one, as a journalist, you're not really supposed to have a biased opinion on anything political. Um, and two, like, I just couldn't see myself like getting involved in all of that emotion and all of that just like raw insanity. So I just kind of like took the time to kind of like escape and like collect my thoughts and kind of be like, okay, whether we like it or not, this is what we have for the next 4 years. And I knew that as a journalist, it was going to be my responsibility to cover it, and to cover it like as honestly as possible. I knew I had to keep my biases aside, and just kind of like move forward and tell the story as best we can. I applied to be on Eagle staff in December of 2016, and then I got accepted in January, and I started after winter break. And actually, the first story that I ever did for the Eagle was on the presidential inauguration. So that entire experience was insane. Yeah, I was there on the ground, like reporting all day. And the way that we covered the story was really interesting. So the editor in chief at the time, she knew that she wanted to cover the inauguration.
Who was that?
Her name was Kate McGill. She basically brought together a team of reporters and a team of photographers. And she assigned each reporter and photographer to a different group of people or like a student group on campus, or like a couple of friends that knew that they were going to the inauguration, and paired us up with them. So I ended up getting paired up with a photographer who, to this day, is still my friend. And we followed this kid around campus, and he was a conservative guy. So I knew from the get-go, like, put your biases away, just ask him questions, just like get him talking about how he feels about the president. And the experience was very eye-opening in some ways. Like, he at the start of the day was saying he voted for Trump, but he did not fully support him. He did not fully endorse him. I think at one point was like, yeah, I liked Jeb Bush or John Kasich or like something like that. Like he was very much like not a Trump dude, but he did not like Hillary. So he voted for Trump. And as the day kind of went on, he got more and more optimistic about Trump, which was interesting. And the whole day we basically just like followed him around wherever he went, and we went downtown. We were walking by like McPherson Square, and like we ended up situating ourselves like right in front of the Trump Hotel during the inauguration parade. And we waited for like hours and hours and hours. And like at one point in time, Trump was like 30 feet in front of me. And I was like, holy crap. Like, I'm a student journalist. This is my first story. I'm out here. The president of the United States, that most of the country does not like, is right there. And I was just like, wow, is this I was like, that was like a big journalism moment. I was like, this is important for me to cover. This is why I want to be a journalist. I want to be the person that's like out there on the ground covering these things. Um, but the other thing that was wild about that day was we came across multiple people that were protesting in some way, marching in some way. We were taking pictures of all their signs. At one point, when we were waiting for the parade to start, there was a group of protesters and a group of Trump supporters right outside, like behind us in the Trump Hotel area, like on Pennsylvania Avenue. And they were just screaming at each other. They had like signs, like the one group had like the like drain the swamp, and then the other side had like F Donald Trump. Like it was so crazy. These people just like screaming at each other. And it was like a very cloudy day. It was freezing, it was cold, and I just felt like I was like, wow, is this seems like a preface for the rest of 4 years. Like to me, it just felt like very dark and cold and bleak, and everybody screaming at each other. It just felt like the country was kind of in a low point, and everybody was kind of arguing with each other. And I just had to stand there and kind of paint that scene for everybody. That was my job as the writer. I just had to like paint that scene. Um, but that was like one of the most wild reporting experiences that I've ever had. And the fact that it was like the first story I ever really wrote, like, was really cool. So the other stories that I've covered, they've been on like a wild variety of topics. Because after I did like student government reporting, I just switched to being like a regular news reporter. So I was kind of just like picking up whatever pitches kind of interested me. So one thing that I wrote about was like AU had its own version of like the G20 summit, which was kind of cool. Or like it was like a G20 event that was kind of cool. And then for the first print edition story that I had was about the people in the physics department working on gravitational wave detection, which was a subject that I knew nothing about. I was like, I don't know anything about science, but this guy sounds really cool. And I got to interview him and the people that work with him in the lab, and like got some photos of them, and they were all really cool people. And like at the end of the day, I learned some things about physics that I didn't know. Um, I think like the biggest story that I think that I had on the Eagle was President Burwell's inauguration story. That was on the cover of the spring 2018 edition, I believe. Um, and that was a wild story to do, because even though it wasn't like anything groundbreaking or like investigative or anything like that, it was a lot of work. It was like 2 months of interviewing deans and people within her staff, and like interviewing her, and because we had no idea what to expect from AU's like first female president. So to kind of like get inside her head and like figure out what she wanted to do with the university, and then talk to people, mostly like a lot of the new deans that she had already spoken with, and they'd already talked about like pulling in new programming, or how they plan to hire like more faculty of color, and like things like that. Um, that was really cool to like have those dialogues, and then talking with those deans and her kind of like set me up to kind of move forward, um, in like Eagle ranks a bit because it helped me kind of figure out how the university administration works. So that was a pretty cool experience. Um, and then after that, I transitioned from like reporting regularly to doing online stuff. Um, so I became online editor in, I think this, yeah, the spring of 2018, like the very end of that semester. And I did it all throughout last year before becoming editor in chief. So I was overseeing all the social media, everything that kind of like went on the website. Um, what else? The newsletter that we do every week. Um, and I designed multimedia project pages. And those are basically longer form stories that include text elements, video elements, photos, like, um, and they're just kind of like designed in a very unique way. Like they're designed differently for each story. Um, and so the most recent one that we put out, which is called, it's I think like the financial future one. Uh, it was about the rising price of tuition and how it's kind of impacting students and getting input from the people on the board of trustees about it, but also looking at the student protests that resulted because of it. And although I didn't really have a hand in reporting that story, that project was really cool to be a part of because I know that when it came out, it made a really big impact on students because they were able to look at these photos and they would look at the graphs and like all the interactive things that we did and be like, oh my God, this is a big problem that keeps happening on campus because tuition keeps going up and we don't want it to go up. And it kind of goes into the elements that impact tuition and like also shows like where that money is going and also how we relate like our endowment and how it's related to other universities because compared to other schools our endowment is pretty low and that's kind of the reason why tuition kind of keeps going up. So I think it was a really cool project to do because like when we shared it to people, people actually like understood what was going on and they actually were able to learn from it, which to me as a journalist, like that's a win. If we're teaching people stuff that they didn't already know and like people are excited about sharing it and getting other people more informed, like that's why I do my job. Like that's the coolest part. I became editor in chief in April of last semester, and that was like very surreal to me because I never saw myself like taking on a role like this. But I knew that I had big expectations for the paper and what I wanted to see out of it next year or this year, I guess. And I know that I wanted to do more of those multimedia projects. I wanted to be able to do like reach out to students more and like expand our social media reach and get people to read the stories that we were doing because the work that we're doing, I feel like people read it and don't really understand it, or they kind of just glance by it on social media and they're like, oh, that's a thing. Like, no, we want you to like actually read what we're doing because what we're doing is like what we feel is worthwhile and informative. Um, and I just want other students to kind of like pay attention because there's a lot going on in this campus. So, so this is the incident from my point of view. And so it was May 1st. I had a final that day. I know that the nooses or the bananas that were hung from nooses that had these racial slurs written on them were hung up on campus sometime that morning. But I was not aware that that ever happened. And I was on campus. I took my final exam, and my roommate and I were at the time walking back from that exam. And we got that email from the university saying that it happened. And we were just appalled. Like, we were like, what? What is up with all of these banana incidents? Um, and I just remember that day, I just kind of like retreated. Like, it was tough because I was a freshman and I was still new to the Eagle. I had some stories under my belt. I was a student government beat reporter, so I covered student government mostly. Um, but when it and then when later on when I found out that a lot of these were targeted at the student government president at the time, Taylor Dumpson, that also kind of like hit home for me. It was like, oh, this is her first day in office, and already like people had to come after her. Um, and my journalistic brain at the time was like, this is not good. Like, you need to, go out and cover this. But my student brain and like my personal brain was like, you are also a student. Like, you need to like sit this one out. So I was not one of the reporters that was covering any of the protests or like any of the initial incidents. I kind of like sat back on that. And I don't regret, I don't regret not going after that story, but I mean, I think I regret more like being there for like my fellow journalists um, during that time because it was finals and we just got a new editor in chief. This was all new to her. And then on top of that, covering something that ended up becoming national news and the FBI had to get involved. And like, we were the paper that broke that story initially. So people were swarming us too, like trying to get information because we had everything first. Um, so I do kind of regret being there to like help out my news team, but in terms of like me being like, oh, this is like my story, it was not my story to tell. So I felt like as a student, I sat this one out. But I followed all of it. I followed all the news coverage. I followed all of the Eagle coverage on it. And a month after the incident happened, I sat down with Taylor herself. There is a video of it. Um, it was a whole video interview that I did with her over the summer. Um, and we basically talked about it was kind of like a check-in. It was like, so this happened. How have you been doing? Have you been trying to like, you know, build things back up? How have you been coping with it mentally, emotionally, like, and she was still student government president. How is this going to change moving forward in student government? And we had a good conversation. That video, I think, is still on our Facebook page. Um, and she, I mean, yeah, I was still kind of shaken up about it, but you could tell that she was ready to like get to work and try to like figure out a solution for students, especially students of color, to like feel more comfortable on campus. Um, it's a shame that she had to leave office before her term was up because we don't know what else she probably could have done while she was in office. Um, but based on that conversation that I had with her, I was hopeful that she would try to like pass legislation or get some stuff done to make students of color feel comfortable. We are the voice of the students. We are the voice of the students, and we have to hold the administration accountable when things like this happen, but we also have to make sure that we are like getting all sides of the story. We're not just talking to students and student organizations. We also have to talk to like the president, the vice president of campus life, and everybody else who in the administration is involved in making sure that students feel comfortable on this campus. So it's about getting a holistic view of the situation, in addition to hearing from what students have to say. So Nicholas Mack, he was the opinion editor until he graduated last year. He wrote this piece that really like broke some ground with the university, basically going through all the history. He went through like tons of archives and things that the university had to find evidence of AU's like slavery past, and wrote this entire opinion piece just like exploiting it. And the university saw this, read it, reflected in a bit, and was like, okay, yeah, we have to accept that this was our past and we should do something to try to improve. So they started a working group. It was like a diversity and inclusion working group made up of professors on campus from different departments. And so far, they've like, I know from talking to some of the professors that are on that working group, they've like tried to host like things with students where the students come in and like talk about issues. They try to host events. I know that they recently sent something out in an email to to the rest of the AU community about an event that they were hosting, or and like they're trying to like sponsor some grants and things like that for students of color, and um, so there's an effort being made as a result of that opinion piece. And that piece, I feel like, serves as like a great example of why we do what we do, to kind of like hold the university accountable and kind of like be like, hey, this is something that you should acknowledge. And the fact that they were like, okay, yes, and did something about it is like kind of remarkable. But when it comes to like making a decision on a story like that, you kind of have to think about, you know, will the benefits of having people read this outweigh the pushback? Because we knew, like, I was not the editor in chief at the time, but I'm pretty sure she knew this was going to get some pushback from people, especially people in the administration. But I think she knew, like, you know, if everything that you've researched for so long checks out, and it did, um, like, I don't think it would be a bad thing to have people kind of read this and reflect in and be like, yeah, we got to acknowledge this and make some change. So, yeah, that's kind of what goes through my head when I have to make a decision on a story like that. Like, will this, if people read it, take something from it rather than just criticize it? Yeah, so I remember the reason why we decided to do that was, I think at the time, and like a lot of different news outlets were publishing these stories that were like, so and so has had a history of blackface, and so, like, it was just a bunch of stories like that at one time. And I think I don't know whose idea it was to be like, oh, well, let's do some digging in the archives and see what we can kind of pull out. Um, I was not on the team of people that was like pulling out all of these yearbooks. I mean, I like volunteered, but I think I had like class at the time. But I know that the kids, like everybody on staff, we are responsible for coming in for a news shift. Um, like it's which is basically like a class period where you come into the office and do work in the office. And so I think one day during one of those shifts, people were like, we're going to go digging through some archives and we're going to look through and see what we can find. And they found all of these photos and things. And they were like, wow, this is a lot. Um, and if all of these other major news networks can hold their the people that they're writing about accountable, shouldn't we be a part of holding our university accountable? And I think that was the mindset behind publishing them. Um, but I think the response to that, there were like two different responses to it. The first being like, oh my God, like, I can't believe all these photos. Like, this is wild. Like, basic student reactions. And I think the other one was some of the organizations that were featured. Um, they were not happy with the way that they were depicted, and they tried to kind of start some legal action. I knew I wanted to be a part of the Eagle because they actually have won awards. They're very like, if you are in journalism, if you're in the Eagle, like there was kind of always that vibe like you were going somewhere. And they had a great reputation and I was like, yes, I'm ready to join. Like let me go. Um but one thing that I learned about the Eagle later that I learned to appreciate that a lot of students don't know about is the Eagle is editorially independent of the university, and students don't understand that. So that means while we do receive funding from the money that comes in from the student activity fee, which everybody pays for in tuition, although we get that allocation, everything that we write, the university is not in charge of it. We are in charge of it. So the fact that we are able to go out, publish what we feel like is important on this campus, and represent the student body in a fair and balanced way. And if that means also criticizing what the university does, that's the stuff that we do. And that's the stuff that, as a journalist, I like doing. Um, and the Eagle is like just a great outlet for students to get started on like whatever they want to do in their journalism career because like we have writers, we have videographers, we have photographers, we have graphic design people, and we're still expanding on those sections and we're working on social media and like a newsletter and a podcast and just all of these other mediums that people use every day because media just like continues to expand so quickly and journalists are like struggling to keep up. Like, okay, like what's another thing that we can do to get people to pay attention to the news? So that's what we're doing. Student journalism is really important, especially in times like these, because I think now more than ever, a lot of information just gets misconstrued on campus. And that's like from student to student, that's administrator to administrator, that's student to administrator, student to faculty, like anybody. And the work that we do it so that everybody on campus can stay informed and we can give them the facts of what's really going on versus the things that they're hearing on campus. And I think now more than ever, people should pay attention and like, because we are every day giving it our all to make sure that people are getting the right information. Um, and it's kind of up to the public's role to listen. So like, we're here so that, people can read and pay attention. But it's not always easy to like just be like, read this, it's about like getting people's attention from all facets of media. And also it's about being representative of like the student body because we are at the end of the day students. Um, so we're doing our best to not only represent the student body and the issues that they care about and covering the events that they care about and things like that, but also like pulling in what's going on with the administration too. That's also like really important perspective for us to put into everything that we do because it's not enough to just be like students did this and students are upset about this. It's like what is the other side of that? You have to be objective. You have to get both of those sides. And we work so hard to try to get that so that students get like the information that they need in like an objective way. Um, and also like this is just like it's not even just like the Eagle. Like this is like all of student media. Like we like bust our butts like putting out these publications and like getting people to join us like because we want to put out not only quality content but content that like we're proud of and things that we can show not only for like jobs and internships and things but like to share with people because it matters at the end of the day. um so yeah, I think student media kind of gets a bad rep um, for like maybe not representing students enough or talking about the administration too much or maybe not covering them enough. But like we are here for students at the end of the day.